Few people are as notorious in the games industry as EA CEO Andrew Wilson, the man largely responsible for the direction that EA has moved in, especially when it comes to the focus on loot boxes, and basically the reason that FIFA became more of a casino disguised as a soccer game rather than a proper soccer game. And the focus on microtransactions and loot boxes, combine that with the annualized release that resets everything, the kind of negative influence that's had on numerous families who've seen, young folks and older folks alike get addicted to this stuff and waste money in this vicious cycle of compulsive spending. All of that is on Andrew Wilson, who continues to encourage this. And now, he came out with an interview that he did with news outlet Fortune, and the article covering this, the headline reads, EA CEO on the pandemic-driven video game boom and streaming's future, published on June 4th, 2021. I'd like to go through this interview because, as usual, the EA CEO is spouting a whole lot of nonsense, trying to absolve EA of any culpability, pretending as if EA's business model is completely ethical, and just acting like all the negative coverage out there surrounding EA, that's all sensationalized, so on and so forth. So let's scroll down here and check this out. At one point he was asked, has EA changed the cadence of releasing new games like FIFA to increase its live service revenue? A portion of his response largely centers around this idea of players who used to buy games and finish them, and almost acting like that's this awful thing. When I started this business 20 years ago, we would build a game and people would play for 4 weeks. They paid $60 for the game and they moved on. What's so wrong about that? Nothing really, except of course those kinds of games are less monetizable. But the fact of the matter is that the industry has a place for both, those long-term MMOs or live services and online games, as well as a place for those story-driven linear games that extend up to a certain point, have a beginning, middle, and end, and that people can move on from. All the best things eventually end. So I don't mind at all, and just about everyone doesn't mind at all, that we get both types of experiences. People would buy 4 or 5 games a year and spend $200 to $250 on these basic games and play for these little blocks of weeks. You've got to love how Andrew Wilson calls linear games or single-player games or games that end basic games, and how players spend these little blocks of weeks. Length does not equal quality. Quantity does not equal quality. I'd much rather spend 10 to 20 amazing hours in a game that ends than 1,000 hours in a grindy live service that constantly encourages me to spend money and gamble on loot boxes that yield rewards that have a low probability. There are indie games these days that feel far less basic than AAA launches like Marvel's Avengers and Anthem and all of these other disastrous projects, and certainly FIFA. Speaking of, Andrew touts how now people buy FIFA and they play it all year. The value for a player is exponentially bigger than it was 20 years ago for the level of engagement they get today. Value isn't defined by the length of engagement. For me, it is defined by the quality of that engagement. Games have become, especially those that focus on microtransactions, have become grindier, in many cases less polished, as these games are rushed to launch because publishers want to meet certain financial guidance. You have to, with a game like FIFA, repurchase it every year, annually, at full price, $60 and now $70. And then you have your microtransactions reset, so you have to re-gamble for all of the items that you earned and pay for that stuff all over again. For EA, engagement doesn't necessarily mean engaging. It just means anything that'll keep players hooked so that they have to grind and eventually be psychologically incentivized to spend after the grind becomes too much. That is EA's definition of engagement, as far as I'm concerned. We are talking about a game whose probabilities to obtain desired rewards are so low that the whole EA Gate scandal happened, where employees within EA actually directly sold players through back-channel means ways to obtain those top-tier cards immediately by paying hundreds if not thousands of dollars. The fact that there's a market for this at all, and the fact that this is still a better alternative to either grinding out for card packs legitimately or purchasing card packs legitimately, says volumes about the level of fairness within FIFA, about the whole player choice argument, about this idea that the value is better than ever. No, it isn't. The value has not gotten better. These games have become more and more expensive to keep up with if you want to stay competitive in Ultimate Team. Because this is a pay-to-win loot box format, you either pay up or you fall behind. And guess what? Months back, somebody actually did the math, and I already covered this, but just to bring this up again in light of this interview, if you want to create this ideal FIFA Ultimate Team that is full of the top players and cards that you can attain, it would take roughly 960 days of gameplay 24/7. So that's 2.5 years of straight gameplay, 69 days, nice, of trading 24/7. And if you were just to spend money on card packs to obtain these players, you would roughly have to spend a total of 79,990 pounds on FIFA points. That is about $110,000 that you need to spend within the span of a year, as these games only last a year before the next release comes out at full price and you have to repurchase basically the same game. It would take all of that just to build your dream team in one FIFA game. They have stretched out the experience to an unreasonable degree and are charging to speed that process up. And this is what Andrew Wilson calls value. Just because there's more engagement, just because he's gotten more people addicted, he thinks that, well, now the game is more valuable. For me, the money I would spend on games like Resident Evil 8 or Returnal or the upcoming Ratchet & Clank, that has far more value than any amount of money I would ever spend on a FIFA game. From there, Andrew Wilson was at one point asked, do game publishers push people to spend too much? And of course, Andrew Wilson, being the CEO of a company that is notorious for its shady monetization practices, got defensive and try to defend EA's practices. When we think about charging any amount of money to any of our players, whether that's for a small item inside of a game, or whether that's a game in its totality or the subscription service that we offer for annualized access to every title that we develop, we think about choice. There it is, Andrew Wilson's favorite word, choice. Except players have no choice in the way FIFA focuses so much, especially its Ultimate Team mode, on gambling, on loot boxes. They're tailoring to the minority of players who are whales and spend a bunch of money on this stuff because this stuff just generates more revenue than a game without microtransactions would. But the cost being that it comes at the expense of those players who are addicted, who are spending way too much money. The rest of the players who don't want this game to rely so heavily on gambling for you to get ahead, who don't want to spend money on this stuff, they're going to lag behind. They're going to be screwed, and they have no choice in the matter. FIFA, EA made that choice for them. Oh, and here's a really funny bit. We want you as a consumer to be able to choose and not be disadvantaged for choosing not to do something, says the man who is running the company that has published FIFA, whose Ultimate Team mode will disadvantage you if you don't pay up. We want gaming to be fun. We don't want it to feel like a grind. Are you serious right now? And the output of that, the output of gaming needing to be fun and not being grindy, he says, is FIFA Ultimate Team. All right, where's my stress box? Just need to decompress for 2 seconds. Oh, by the way, Yong surprise mechanics, loot box-shaped stress boxes are actually quite fun and quite ethical. If you're ever stressed, just squeeze and get it all out. And also, of course, just a way to poke fun at companies like EA and their utterly moronic PR statements. If you want to support the channel, be sure to head over to yongya.com and check out some of the merch, including a Sense of Pride and Accomplishment shirt that came out recently that also makes fun of EA for their most downvoted comment in Reddit history. If game companies are happy to make revenue at the expense of players and their health, then I'm more than happy to ship a product that people might enjoy and that will allow people to support my channel at the expense of these companies. But anyway, back to the news. This is like if Pablo Escobar said, we wanted to make a drug that isn't addictive, that you can't overdose on, that's just healthy all around from top to bottom, and the output of that is cocaine. We are talking about a game mode that you have to play for 2.5 years straight to build your dream team filled with the top players, an unrealistic goal, especially in the year-long lifespan that each FIFA entry has. To further drive this narrative of player choice, Andrew Wilson said 2/3 of players don't spend money on digital services, and 9 out of 10 packs are open with earned points, not with purchase points. See, players are choosing. Yeah, but the choice is costing them progression. Those other folks who paid for these card packs and have spent en masse on them, they're way ahead of the curve. They have a competitive advantage. The majority of players can't afford to or don't want to fall into the trap of loot boxes, which is why, of course, 9 out of 10 packs are opened with earned points. And for making that choice, they're punished and they're incentivized to spend like that minority of players who are spending hundreds, thousands of dollars, whether they can afford it or not, because they're addicted or because they got money to burn, and are way ahead of the curve and have a lot of the top players. But even then, the players who spend thousands, if they haven't spent almost $110,000, they're still not going to get this dream team. They're going to have maybe pieces of this. But even those who've spent so much money on this stuff are ultimately going to end up shortchanged. Pointing out that 9 out of 10 packs are open with earned points is like pointing out how the majority of people who drink alcohol aren't alcoholics. Does that mean alcoholism isn't an issue? No. And in the case of FIFA, because the game is designed around monetization, monetizing that minority of players who spend en masse, the game design and the gameplay loop is compromised for the rest of us who just want a more normal game experience, something that doesn't resemble basically a casino. But we're not going to get that because obviously EA is only thinking about their business, not the experience, not the players, as they constantly imply. Andrew Wilson then continues to deflect blame, saying, "We have seen companies cause people to do unnatural things in our industry and other industries, and you can rely on all kinds of negative motivations like guilt and obligation. When you fulfill positive motivations, you extend the lifetime value of a franchise and a business." The guy actually has the audacity to say, "Oh, we have seen other companies do some shady stuff with microtransactions with negative motivations. Here at EA, we don't do that stuff. No. We're all about positive motivations that will keep players happy to spend while we as a business thrive." Like, that's kind of the narrative he's putting out there, except there are plenty of negative motivations in their games. With FIFA Ultimate Team, the negative motivation is if you don't pay, you fall behind. You competitively won't be able to keep up. Give us money now. That's a negative motivation. Andrew Wilson keeps trying to pretend like their company does things differently. They are better than those other companies out there who also do microtransactions, when in reality, EA is amongst the worst. Andrew Wilson then proceeds to shift blame to the press about the negative perception surrounding Electronic Arts as a whole, saying that this is a real hot-button issue, and I think the press have used sensationalist headlines to paint Electronic Arts in a really poor light. Oh, trust me, it's not the headlines that have garnered you that negative reputation, it's your own actions. People play your games, give the feedback, form their opinions, and media will play these games too and form their own opinions. And when they cover it, the people will agree, having experienced similar things to what's being reported, which is that FIFA Ultimate Team is grindy, it's unreasonable in its probabilities and in the amount of grind that it demands, and it very much encourages just a vast amount of spending on these packs that will expire within a year. And it's not just press. Researchers, experts in their respective fields when it comes to gambling and the psychology surrounding it have been saying the same thing. In this report called Lifting the Lid on Loot Boxes, for example, it was reported that loot boxes, video game features used by nearly 40% of children. Gambling used by 40% of children have clear links to problem gambling. Approximately 5% of loot box users generate half of the 700 million pounds that video game companies make from them each year, and about a third of that group are problem gamblers. Half of roughly $1 billion are generated by 5% of players, and that 5%, they're whales. And 5% might not sound like much, but when we're talking about a population of millions and billions, that 5% is a significant portion. I've also previously covered research that actually asked FIFA players, kids, teenagers, and adults about what they think about the mode Ultimate Team and whether they believe it's fair, and a significant portion of them believed that the mode wasn't fair and that it was clearly encouraging extra expenditure from players for them to keep up. So plenty of media outlets, plenty of players and communities, and plenty of researchers are pretty much saying the same thing, are pretty much in agreement that these loot boxes are unhealthy, that they're as close to gambling as you can get, that it can cause problem gambling, and it has all of these adverse effects. And yet Andrew Wilson touts that this is all sensationalism done to paint EA in a really poor light, when what we want is for EA to be better. Given the treasure trove of beloved IPs under their umbrella, we would love to see those IPs shine. But EA is the one getting in the way of that because of executive greed. Andrew Wilson then says, and I just want people to know that's not how we're oriented. We're not short-term, we're long-term, and we're not about the money. We're not about the money, we're about fulfilling motivations. We're not about the money, Andrew Wilson says, as EA continues to generate record revenue from the exploitation of players through microtransactions and loot boxes, as the executives continue to rake in millions upon millions and continue to give themselves bonuses while hundreds of employees are laid off. And he wants to tell the people, this is not how we are, we're not evil. The way the sensationalist headlines paint us in a poor light, don't trust them, trust me, your millionaire CEO who has nothing to express but truth. Not once does Andrew Wilson mention quality. He doesn't mention the criticisms from even hardcore players who are getting sick and tired of these broken releases that focus on monetization. And he has not addressed and provided evidence that counter research that tells us that Ultimate Team is basically gambling. It's basically a soccer-themed casino, and that loot boxes can cause mental issues and obviously can financially deteriorate folks who become addicted to this stuff. None of that stuff is addressed. All he talks about is basically the same key talking points: player choice, engagement, all this crap. And those points continue to ring hollow. There's not much else for me to say here. EA is the master of spouting lies that are very obvious to see through and deconstruct. Andrew Wilson's arguments here hold about as much ground as their attempt to relabel loot boxes or gambling as surprise mechanics. That's just one man's take. Let me know in the comments below what you think about the latest comments from EA CEO Andrew Wilson. And to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.